This past week, I had an interview with Pastor Mike Winger on his YouTube channel, his Apologetics YouTube channel, about my book, The Mirror or the Mask, Liberating the Gospels from Literary Devices, and about the so-called compositional device views, the fact-changing compositional device views that I am opposing in that book. It was a really interesting interview, I think very informative. I'm going to link it in the video description below this video. I encourage you, if you're interested in such video interviews, to go and watch it. Toward the end of that interview, Pastor Winger and I were discussing why it seems that a lot of Christians accept these compositional device views without detailed investigation. Why they are just very welcoming to them and don't go and say, well, let's look into this, let's look into counter arguments, let's see if these are really justified and so forth. Why don't they do that? And he said something very interesting that I'd like to discuss more today in this video. Pastor Mike Winger said that he talks to a lot of apologists and that they are drawn to such views and tend to accept them somewhat uncritically because they believe that they simplify their apologetic task and that it's just convenient to be able to say, well, I don't have to stop and discuss those alleged discrepancies. Let's just suppose that they all were changed deliberately, are the result of some sort of change by the author, but it's all okay somehow because we're going to just call those compositional devices. We're just going to say, though, that was allowed at their time. They were compositional devices of their day, and now we've done, we've finished with alleged discrepancies, and we can move on with the positive case, perhaps a minimal facts case, for example, that the apologist wishes to make. And that this causes some Christian apologists to be rather uncritical about these views and not to want to listen to Lydia McGrew's objections because it would just take up so much time, and I just want to be able to call these compositional devices and move on with my apologetic task. Well, obviously, one thing I can say right at the beginning that seems rather obvious is that just because something is convenient, or you think it would be convenient if it were true, does not make it true. So I've presented arguments that these views are false, and you should investigate those. Because if they're false, it's important that you not be saying that they're true. But I can go further than that, and I would like to go into more depth on that in this video. The first thing I want to say to you, if you're taking an approach of that kind, is that nobody is offering you a genre claim according to which the gospel authors only changed maybe 3 things in each gospel, 3 small things per gospel max, and then they've signed some kind of a contract that they're not changing any more or anything any more important than what you would be comfortable with. And that's it, just 3, and other than that, you can take most of it at face value. Nobody's offering you that. And you can kind of see that from the approach to begin with. If we're saying, oh, I don't want to stop and deal with those alleged discrepancies, I'm just going to call them all compositional devices. Well, how many alleged discrepancies are there that a skeptic like Bart Ehrman is going to bring up? A lot. More than just 3, more even than just 3 per gospel. Right? He's going to bring up a lot. So right away, you should be honest with yourself and admit that if you're taking that approach, you're not then allowed to go back and say, oh, well, there's just only a couple. Because that's not what the genre claim amounts to. There's another way of looking at this, which is that this is how the genre claim works in order to absolve the authors of deception. And here's what that means. Here's what I mean by that. When you enter a movie that is based on true events, do you expect there to be just 2 or 3 things changed? Do you just basically take everything at face value with the exception of a couple things? No. If it's a movie based on true events, you know that they could change times, many times. They could add lots of dialogue to make it more dramatic. They can even make up characters that did not historically exist, or maybe amalgamate two characters into one. They could change a lot of things, and you therefore know that you have to take a lot of the information in that with a grain of salt. That's how you're not deceived. So if we don't want to call the gospel authors deceivers, because we want to say that it was their genre, then we have to recognize that there are going to be question marks over a lot of things. Not just question marks over one or two things, because that's not how a genre works that's merely based on true events. A genre works to avoid deception by expecting that the audience is going to lower its expectations, or shall we say manage its expectations for literal historical accuracy across a fairly wide number of apparent facts within the narrative. But at that point, you do have a reliability problem. Now, the genre theorists will try to tell you you don't. I have argued that this is because they are redefining reliability. But I am here to get you to think about it for a minute. Would you cite a movie based on true events as an original historical source for the events recounted in them? I hope not. I hope that an historian would not do so, and that a professor in a history class would not accept that. And there's a reason for that, and it's because of the literary license that they were allowed to take. You would not treat it as a strong historical source. And the sheer number of these potential changes is part of the reason for that. Whole classes of fact are cast into question and doubt. We see this from the genre theorists' own work, particularly in what I myself have called unforced errors, utterly unforced errors. As I mentioned in my interview with Pastor Winger, recently Craig Keener did an interview on a show called Kinda Christian, and they were discussing the supposed license that the authors had in the Gospels to change things. And he brought up the fact that only Luke records that Jesus healed the right hand of the man with the withered hand. And therefore he suggested that Luke might have just added that, in other words, without a reason in history, just to make the story, I guess, more specific. He might have just, in other words, made it up. Now, Dr. Keener immediately said it's possible that he had another source. He was open to that. But he said we have no way of testing it. This is very similar to what Dr. Lacona will do. When he questions, again, out of the blue, there's no apparent contradiction, that possibly John may have just made up where Jesus says, "Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice," as a callback for his readers to the place where Jesus says, "My sheep hear my voice." Why? Just because. Okay? And then he says, "No, I'm not saying that's what happened." No, but you're using it as an illustration of the kind of thing that, for all we know, John might have done. In fact, Dr. Lacona will say historians can't know. So unless everything is tested and individually confirmed on a detail by detail, sentence by sentence basis, there's a question mark over it. Okay? That's not treating the documents as highly reliable. But that is very consistent with the genre claim that's being made. That is how we would approach a movie based on true events, only based on true events. We would say, well, maybe that's changed, I don't know. Maybe that's changed, I don't know. And that's exactly what they're doing. So if you accept the genre claim in order to absolve the authors from deception, in order to simplify your apologetic task, then I think you ought to admit that you have a reliability problem. And as I pointed out on Pastor Winger's show, this does have apologetic implications. It makes it harder for us to defend the resurrection. It makes it harder for us to defend, for example, the idea that Jesus appeared to the skeptic, doubting Thomas. It makes it harder for us to defend doctrine, because there are a lot of teachings of Jesus that he may not have historically uttered in a recognizable fashion. It makes it harder for us to respond to cults. If they, let's say they accept that Jesus is an authority of some kind, and then we want to say, well, he taught this, and that goes against your cult's teachings, And they can just say, well, maybe you didn't really teach that. So there are a lot of ways in which, once you accept that, it is actually going to undermine your apologetic task rather than helping it. Now, suppose you listen to all of this and you say, okay, I'm going to go a different direction. I'm not going to just accept this genre claim that it's all these different places. I'm just going to stipulate it's just 2 or 3. I'm just going to say that. I'll try to harmonize. Okay, I'll try to harmonize a lot. But when I'm not satisfied with a harmonization, then by golly, I'm not going to settle for uncertainty. I'm going to say it was a literary device. It was a compositional device, and the author changed that. But I'll only do it in a couple places. So then that'll be okay, right? I'm getting away from this reliability problem. Well, you've escaped Scylla for Charybdis, as the saying goes. You've escaped one horn of the dilemma for the other. Because at that point, I would say you do have a deception problem. You have taken away from yourself the ability to say, well, this was a genre, like a movie based on true events, in which the audience just expected many different things to be changed, even if they couldn't tell where, so they took them with a grain of salt, so they weren't misled. No. Now you're going to say they could. They could take this just at face value. And the author knew that they would take it at face value. And in fact, the author narrated truly and just what he believed to be the truth, 99% of the time, and then he just changed a couple things. And the audience, of course, would have no way of telling which those were. Now, I avoid the word deception. I talk about fact changing, and I talk about the fact that it would be invisible to the audience. But I say, if we accept the genre claim, supposedly it's not deception. But if you're going to go the direction of saying, well, it's just a couple, then that doesn't look like the genre anymore. If it's a different genre where this is just part and parcel, we're not just going to accept a couple. So now, how do you absolve the author of deception? Here you have an author. He's narrating. He knows his audience is going to take him at face value. He knows his audience is going to take him at face value all the time. He's not putting any tag in his text to tell the 2 or 3 few times when he's deliberately changing it. He's deliberately changing the facts, and he knows that his audience is going to accept what he's saying. How is he now not a deceiver? You've stripped away that idea of a genre. So either you accept this idea of a genre, in which case you have a reliability problem, or you try arbitrarily to limit this to just a couple of times, in which case you have a deception problem. I'm going to recommend that you don't accept either of those. I'm going to recommend that you not fall into that dilemma by accepting the reportage model instead, in which the gospel authors never deliberately change anything. They're trying to report truly, and they're highly successful at doing so. Now, does this mean that I'm saying that you have to have a harmonization for every alleged contradiction, and you have to give that, and if you're talking to Bart Ehrman, you have to let him interrupt you to talk about the death of Judas for the 99,000th time? No, I am not saying that. In fact, we're allowed to say if we are not satisfied with harmonizations. Moreover, you don't let your opponent in a debate dictate the order in which you state things. In my book, Hidden in Plain View, I did not go into the attempt to resolve contradictions, but at the same time, I didn't grant for the sake of the argument that these are all irresolvable, much less that the author changed it on purpose. I just said, in this book, I'm going to make a positive case for the reliability of the Gospels. I'm going to just set that aside for right now. I'm going to talk about that. And you can do that. In fact, I encourage you to do that. I do encourage you to do that in a different way than the minimal facts case. I will also link below a webinar that I did for Apologetics Academy called Minimal Facts versus Maximal Data, Approaches to the Resurrection. Please don't accept the caricature of the maximal data approach that says that it's going to take forever, you're going to, every debate, there's no elevator version, you're going to have to go into all this detail. Oh my goodness, there's an elevator version. That's a misunderstanding. But it's not, it just isn't the minimal facts approach. And I think it would be good to have in your arsenal, in your toolkit, answers to alleged contradictions for when those come up and when you do decide to address those. But no, I'm not saying that you have to let Bart Ehrman bully you into addressing them at the point when he chooses in a discussion, or any other skeptic either. You're always allowed and even encouraged to present your own positive case. As far as that goes, there is no problem with making your apologetic task efficient in what I'm advocating. But what I am saying is that to grant that the gospel authors change things on purpose comes at far too high a cost. And for that reason, you should look into the question. You should look into the arguments. You should look into the counter-arguments. And you should consider that if the theorists are wrong and there isn't a genre like this, then you don't want to be going out there and saying that there was. And that if you do say that, then even on their own account, it casts doubt on a lot of material in the Gospels. So there are lots of reasons for you to rethink this. And I present this dilemma to you in order to motivate you to investigate this carefully and not to accept it uncritically. We'll be doing more in later videos on reasons for thinking that the Gospels are reliable and reasons for rejecting these kinds of theories. For right now, what I want to do is encourage you to look up my videos, my book Hidden in Plain View, my book The Mirror or the Mask, my interviews that I've done, such as with Pastor Winger recently, and give some deep thought to this if you have previously been inclined to adopt these compositional device views. Thanks for watching. I'm Lydia McGrew.